Good morning. How you doing? Oh, come on. How you doing? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm tired too. Boy, that Chief Louis, he can talk, huh? It was good, though. I know Chief Louis. He's a good guy. I like him. Where are you, Clarence? You still here? No, I guess he had to go get something to eat. Yeah. Anyways, good morning. I'm very pleased to be here. I was thinking last night about what would be important for you to hear, and what I could tell you that would be of value and meaningful to you. I'm a Mohawk from Ganawage, that's in Quebec, and my parents divorced when I was very young. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in the States, and I was a talented young musician. I worked really very hard as a kid while the kids were out playing and doing stuff. And actually, I wanted to be out playing with them. I always had to come home and practice music after school. And my mother and grandmother made me practice, and I'm sort of glad they did. At the age of 18, by an absolute accident, sheer luck, I was asked to play the piano and audition two women who were going to sing for a Broadway producer that was in New York, and he was traveling America, and he was recruiting talent. So I was asked to play the piano for these two women, and they were singing a classical Mozart aria, and the Broadway producer said, "That's very nice, but can you sing something from Broadway, because I'm a Broadway producer." So the two women said, "Well, we can sing the songs, but we didn't bring the music, so this poor kid can't play the music for us." And I had spent years and years and years learning to play by ear. So I said, I was sort of a little squirrely guy, and I said, "Oh, I can do it. Just name the song, give me a key." So I was able to play the music, and afterwards, in an auditorium 5 times this size, out in the dark, the producer said, "Can you come out and see me, son?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "How would you like a job? And you can go to New York with me, and you'll have a job." And I said, "Well, I'll have to ask my mom." So at the age of 18, by absolute accident, I ended up in New York City working on Broadway. And over the years, I would conduct in that era, they were big stars, Gene Kelly and Vincent Price. I traveled with Sonny Bono of Sonny and Cher. I conducted for the Bee Gees, Lauren Bacall, a famous Hollywood movie star. And just being in New York was an education, was more valuable almost than my university education. It's a sophisticated place. The best of the best go to New York. I worked with the best producers, the best directors, the best lighting directors, the best financing people, the best marketers who sold tickets. And I actually learned about how to produce, how to direct, although at the time I didn't realize that. I didn't realize sitting in meetings and hearing really smart people talking about producing and directing and lighting and costumes and how to build a set, I didn't realize I was actually learning that at the time. But the moral of the story of me going to Broadway was opportunity presents itself, and opportunity will present itself to you, all of you. At a certain point in your life, you'll be at the right place at the right time. But the question is, will you be prepared? When I was 18 and I was on that stage playing the piano, because I could play by ear, that took me years and years and years to learn how to do, I was able to play the music in the way that the guy out there was wanting, and he hired me. Now, I would have never known who that was. I could have never called that person up. I didn't know who he was. I never really heard of Broadway. I mean, I heard of Broadway, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what musicals were. But I was in the right time at the right place, but I was prepared. And that's all about education. That's all about training. That's about developing yourself to the fullest potential. And so the opportunity for me suddenly changed my entire life. And throughout my entire life, there have been times when I was at a certain place talking to a certain person on that day, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it would change my life. And all of that will happen for you if you're prepared and you're ready to go. Communication is very important. Often we don't communicate very well. And as First Nations people, as Aboriginal people, we live in a way very separate from the rest of society. And they say they don't understand us, and we say we don't understand them very well. There's a little joke I have about lack of communication. The young Indian chief, he's a young chief like Clarence Louis, and he's having his first band meeting, and he wants to impress the people in his community. So he goes to the weatherman, the local weatherman, and he says, can you tell me what the winter's going to be like? And the guy says, oh, I think it's going to be a cold winter this year. So the chief goes back to his community members that night, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I think I think you should start collecting firewood because it's going to be a very cold winter. Oh, they said, thanks, chief, thanks very much. So about 3 weeks later, he's going to have his second community meeting, and he decides he's going to go back to the weatherman again. So he goes back to the weatherman at Environment Canada, and he says, can you give me an update on the weather? And the weatherman said, well, I told you it was going to be cold 3 weeks ago, but right now we actually think it's going to be colder than we first thought. The chief says, thank you very much. And he went back, and that night at the community meeting, he said, oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, he said, before you go, you should collect even more firewood because I think it's going to be even colder than it is, than I told you 3 weeks ago. Another month passes. The chief goes, there's going to be another community meeting. The chief goes back to the weatherman, and he says to the weatherman, do you have any updates for me on the weather? The weatherman says, believe it or not, I think this is going to be the coldest winter on record. And the chief says, well, how do you know that? He says, well, we can't be for sure, but the Indians are sure collecting a lot of firewood this year. So when I was a young person, a First Nations person, I decided from my Broadway experience I wanted to be a conductor, and a symphony conductor, a conductor of orchestras. And everybody in my community made fun of me for that. And they said, oh, you're a bad guy because that's not traditional. That's not what a native should do. That's not what a Mohawk or a First Nations person should do. You're not traditional. That word traditional, what does that mean, traditional? You know what? It doesn't mean anything. I'll tell you why it doesn't mean anything. All cultures change. Every single culture changes. The only constant in the world is change. Everything changes. We don't eat the foods that we ate 600 years ago or 1,000 years ago. We don't dress the way we dressed 1,000 years ago. We don't think the way we thought 1,000 years ago. Every culture changes. There have been cultures, the Sumerians, the Phrygians, the Roman Empire. They have risen, they have grown to enormous populations, and they have been exterminated, and they have ceased to exist because they didn't remain dynamic in their environment. They didn't adopt, they didn't change to the changing world. Now what's happening in our country is really, really very simple. And you know, I'm actually a businessman now, so I'm not supposed to be very political, but I am. And because I make a lot of money, I can say what I want now. I'm actually a senior vice president at a multinational firm, Brookfield Renewable Power. We build dams and generating stations, and we have the largest wind farm in Canada, the Prince Wind Farm. And there are very few First Nations people in the senior ranks of institutional corporate Canada. But the reality of our people is that when the Europeans came here, they have this sense of justice, that the British Queen has honor, and that there's a rule of law, that there are laws and there are justice. And for Britain and for the Europeans, they wanted to bring that sense of justice that they had here. So what they did was, they sort of illegally took all the land, but they pretended to make it legal by creating treaties. And then they created an Indian Act, a set of laws which are different for us as Native people than for other Canadians. It's terribly discriminatory, it's terribly racist and biased, but we actually accept it now. 100 years later, the Indian Act is still in force, and the chiefs don't try to get rid of it. We've accepted it. A set of laws for me, because I'm First Nations, and the guy next to me, who's Swedish, has the other laws, and we accept that in this country. And so, when our community leaders test the law in the courts, we begin now and then to win here and there. And they have created a law that says we own the land and you don't own the land, even though we did own the land. We were here, there's no question about it. And all those minerals and all the trees and all the water and all the things that create economic benefit for this country, and this country is very, very wealthy. All of that wealth that's generated goes to them.